Report from Iron Mountain on the possibility and desirability of peace. They do social experiments, so enjoy.
Report from Iron Mountain on the possibility and desirability of peace. With introductory material by Leonard C. Lewin. The Dial Press, Inc. 1967. New York. Library of Congress Catalog Card Number 6727553 printed in the U.S. 2. Contents. Forward 3 Background Information 8 Statement by John Doe, 16 The Report of the Special Study Group 18 Letter of Transmittal 18 Introduction 19 Section 1 Scope of the Study 21 Section 2 Disarmament and the Economy 24 Section 3 Disarmament Scenarios 28 Section 4 War and Peace as Social Systems 30 Section 5 The Functions of War 33 Section 6 Substitutes for the Functions of War 46 Section 7 Summary and Conclusions 59 Section 8 Recommendations 69 Notes 74 3. Forward. John Doe, as I will call him in this book for reasons that will be made clear, is a professor at a large university in the Middle West. His field is one of the social sciences, but I will not identify him beyond this. He telephoned me one evening last winter, quite unexpectedly. We had not been in touch for several years. He was in New York for a few days, he said, and there was something important he wanted to discuss with me. He wouldn't say what it was. We met for lunch the next day at a midtown restaurant. He was obviously disturbed. He made small talk for half an hour, which was quite out of character, and I didn't press him. Then, apropos of nothing, he mentioned a dispute between a writer and a prominent political family that had been in the headlines. What he wanted to know were my views on freedom of information. How would I qualify them? And so on. My answers were not memorable, but they seemed to satisfy him. Then, quite abruptly, he began to tell me the following story. Early in August of 1963, he said he found a message on his desk that a Mrs. Potts had called him from Washington. When he returned the call, a man answered immediately and told Doe, among other things, that he had been selected to serve on a commission of the highest importance. Its objective was to determine, accurately and realistically, the nature of the problems that would confront the United States if and when a condition of permanent peace should arrive, and to draft a program for dealing with this contingency. The man described the unique procedures that were to govern the Commission's work and that were expected to extend its scope far beyond that of any previous examination of these problems. Considering that the caller did not precisely identify either himself or his agency, his persuasiveness must have been a truly remarkable order. Doe entertained no serious doubts of the bona fides of the project, however, chiefly because of his previous experience with the excessive secrecy that often surrounds quasi-governmental activities. In addition, the man at the other end of the line demonstrated an impressively complete and surprisingly detailed knowledge of Doe's work and personal life. He also mentioned the names of others who were to serve with the group. Most of them were known to Doe by reputation. Doe agreed to take the assignment. He felt he had no real choice in the matter, and to appear the second Saturday following at Iron Mountain, New York. An airline ticket arrived in his mail the next morning. 4. The cloak and dagger tone of this convocation was further enhanced by the meeting place itself. Iron Mountain, located near the town of Hudson, is like something out of Ian Fleming or E. Phillips Oppenheim. It is an underground nuclear hideout for hundreds of large American corporations. Most of them use it as an emergency storage vault for important documents. But a number of them maintain substitute corporate headquarters as well, where essential personnel could presumably survive and continue to work after an attack. This latter group includes such firms as Standard Oil of New Jersey, manufacturers Hanover Trust, and Shell. I will leave most of the story of the operations of the Special Study Group, as the commission was formally called, for Doe to tell in his own words background information. At this point it is necessary to say only that it met and worked regularly for over 2.5 years, after which it produced a report. It was this document, and what to do about it, that Doe wanted to talk to me about. The report, he said, had been suppressed, both by the Special Study Group itself and by the government interagency committee to which it had been submitted. After months of agonizing, Doe had decided that he would no longer be party to keeping it secret. What he wanted from me was advice and assistance in having it published. He gave me his copy to read, with the express understanding that if for any reason I were unwilling to become involved, I would say nothing about it to anyone else. I read the report that same night. I will pass over my own reactions to it, except to say that the unwillingness of Doe's associates to publicize their findings became readily understandable. What had happened was that they had been so tenacious in their determination to deal comprehensively with the many problems of transition to peace that the original questions asked of them were never quite answered. Instead, this is what they concluded: lasting peace, while no theoretically impossible, is probably unattainable. Even if it could be achieved, it would almost certainly not be in the best interests of a stable society to achieve it. That is the gist of what they say. Behind their qualified academic language runs this general argument: war fills certain functions essential to the stability of our society. Until other ways of filling them are developed, the war system must be maintained and improved in effectiveness. 5. It is not surprising that the group, in its letter of transmittal, did not choose to justify its work to the lay reader, unexposed to the exigencies of higher political or military responsibility. Its report was addressed, deliberately, to unnamed government administrators of high rank. It assumed considerable political sophistication from this select audience. To the general reader, therefore, the substance of the document may be even more unsettling than its conclusions. He may not be prepared for some of its assumptions. For instance, that most medical advances are viewed more as problems than as progress, or that poverty is necessary and desirable, public postures by politicians to the contrary notwithstanding, or that standing armies are, among other things, social welfare institutions in exactly the same sense as are old people's homes and mental hospitals. It may strike him as odd to find the probably explanation of flying saucer incidents disposed of en passant in less than a sentence. He may be less surprised to find that the space program and the controversial anti-missile and fallout shelter programs are understood to have the spending of vast sums of money, not the advancement of science or national defense, as their principal goals, and to learn that military draft policies are only remotely concerned with defense. He may be offended to find the organized repression of minority groups, and even the reestablishment of slavery, seriously and on the whole favorably discussed as possible aspects of a world at peace. He is not likely to take kindly to the notion of the deliberate intensification of air and water pollution as part of a program leading to peace, even when the reason for considering it is made clear. That a world without war will have to turn sooner rather than later to universal test tube procreation will be less disturbing, if no more appealing. But few readers will not be taken aback, at least by a few lines in the report's conclusions, repeated in its formal recommendations, that suggest that the long-range planning and budgeting of the optimum number of lives to be destroyed annually in overt warfare is high on the group's list of priorities for government action. I cite these few examples primarily to warn the general reader what he can expect. The statesmen and strategists for whose eyes the report was intended obviously need no such protective admonition. This book, of course, is evidence of my response to Doe's request. After carefully considering the problems that might confront the publisher of the report, we took it to the Dial Press. Its significance was immediately recognized, and, more important, we were given firm assurances that no outside pressures of any sort would be permitted to interfere with its publication. 6. It should be made clear that Doe does not disagree with the substance of the report, which represents his genuine consensus in all important respects. He constituted a minority of one, but only on the issue of disclosing it to the general public. A look at how the group dealt with this question will be illuminating. The debate took place at the group's last full meeting before the report was written, late in March 1966, and again at Iron Mountain. 2 facts must be kept in mind, by way of background. The first is that the Special Study Group had never been explicitly charged with or sworn to secrecy, either when it was convened or at any time thereafter. The second is that the group had nevertheless operated as if it had been. This was assumed from the circumstances of its inception and from the tone of its instructions. The group's acknowledgement of help from the many persons who contributed so greatly to our work is somewhat equivocal. These persons were not told the nature of the project for which their special resources of information were solicited. Those who argued the case for keeping the report secret were admittedly motivated by fear of the explosive political effects that could be expected from publicity. For evidence, they pointed to the suppression of the far less controversial report of then-Senator Hubert Humphrey's Subcommittee on Disarmament in 1962. Subcommittee members had reportedly feared that it might be used by communist propagandists, as Senator Stuart Symington put it, to back up the Marxian theory that production was the reason for the success of capitalism. Similar political precautions had been taken with the better-known Gaither Report in 1957, and even with the so-called Moynihan Report in 1965. Furthermore, they insisted, a distinction must be made between serious studies, which are normally classified in lesson until policymakers decide to release them, and conventional, showcase, projects organized to demonstrate a political leadership's concerns about an issue and to deflect the energy of those pressing for action on it. The example used, because some of the group had participated in it, was a White House conference on intended cooperation, disarmament, etc., which had been staged late in 1965 to offset complaints about escalation of Vietnam War. Doe acknowledges this distinction, as well as the strong possibility of public misunderstanding. But he feels that if the sponsoring agency had wanted to mandate secrecy, it could have done so at the outset. It could also have assigned the project to one of the government's established think tanks, which normally work on a classified basis. He scoffed at fear of public reaction, which could 7. Have no lasting effect on long-range measures that might be taken to implement the group's proposals, and derided the group's abdication of responsibility for its opinions and conclusions. So far as he was concerned, there was such a thing as a public right to know what was being done on its behalf. The burden of proof was on those who would abridge it. If my account seems to give Doe the better of the argument, despite his failure to convince his colleagues, so be it. My participation in this book testifies that I am not neutral. In my opinion, the decision of the Special Study Group to censor its own findings was not merely timid but presumptuous. But the refusal, as of this writing, of the agencies for which the report was prepared to release it themselves raises broader questions of public policy. Such questions center on the continuing use of self-serve definitions of security to avoid possible political embarrassment. It is ironic how often this practice backfires. I should state, for the record, that I do not share the attitudes toward war and peace, life and death, and survival of the species manifested in the report. Few readers will, in human terms, It is an outrageous document. But it does represent a serious and challenging effort to define an enormous problem. And it explains, or certainly appears to explain, aspects of American policy otherwise incomprehensible by the ordinary standards of common sense. What we may think of these explanations is something else, but it seems to me that we are entitled to know not only what they are but whose they are. By whose, I don't mean merely the names of the authors of the report. Much more important, we have a right to know to what extent their assumptions of social necessity are shared by the decision makers in our government. Which do they accept and which do they reject? However disturbing the answers, only full and frank discussion offers any conceivable hope of solving the problems raised by the Special Study Group in their report from Iron Mountain. LCL New York, June 1967. 8. Background information. The following account of the workings of the Special Study Group is taken verbatim from a series of tape-recorded interviews I had with John Doe. The transcript has been edited to minimize the intrusion of my questions and comments, as well as for length, and the sequence has been revised in the interest of continuity. LCL. How was the group formed? The general idea for this kind of study dates back at least to 1961. It started with some of the new people who came in with the Kennedy administration. Mostly, I think, with McNamara, Bundy, and Rusk. They were impatient about many things. One of them was that no really serious work had been done about planning for peace, a long-range peace, that is, with long-range planning. Everything that had been written on the subject before 1961 was superficial. There was insufficient appreciation of the scope of the problem. The main reason for this, of course, was that the idea of a real peace in the world, general disarmament and so on, was looked on as utopian. Or even crackpot. This is still true. And it's easy enough to understand when you look at what's going on in the world today. It was reflected in the studies that had been made up to that time. They were not realistic. The idea of the special study, the exact form it would take, was worked out early in 63. The settlement of the Cuban Missile Affair had something to do with it. But what helped most to get it moving were the big changes in military spending that were being planned. Plants being closed, relocations, and so forth. Most of it wasn't made public until much later. I understand it took a long time to select the people for the group. The calls didn't go out until the summer. WHO made the selection. That's something I can't tell you. I wasn't involved with the preliminary planning. The first I knew of it was when I was called myself. But 3 of the people had been in on it. And what the rest of us know we learned from them about what went on earlier. I do know that it started very informally. I don't know what particular government agency approved the project. 9. Would you care to make a guess? All right, I think it was an ad hoc committee. At the cabinet level. Or near it. It had to be. I suppose they gave the organizational job, making arrangements, paying the bills, and so on, to somebody from the State or Defense of the National Security Council. Only one of us was in touch with Washington, and I wasn't the one. But I can tell you that very few people knew about us. For instance, there was the Ackley Committee. It was set up after we were. If you read their report, the same old tune, economic reconversion, turning sword plants into plowshare factories. I think you'll wonder if even the president knew about our group. The Ackley Committee certainly didn't. Is that possible? Really? I mean that not even the president knew of your commission. Well, I don't think there's anything odd about the government attacking a problem at 2 different levels. Or even about 2 or 3 government agencies working at cross purposes. It happens all the time. Perhaps the president did know. And I don't mean to denigrate the Ackley Committee, but it was exactly that narrowness of approach that we were supposed to get away from. You have to remember, you've read the report, that what they wanted from us was a different kind of thinking. It was a matter of approach. Herman Kahn calls us Byzantine, no agonizing over cultural and religious values. No moral posturing. It's the kind of thinking that Rand and the Hudson Institute and IDA, Institute for Defense Analysis, brought into war planning. What they asked us to do, and I think we did it, was to give the same kind of treatment to the hypothetical nuclear war. We may have gone further than they expected, but once you establish your premises and your logic, you can't turn back. Kahn's books, for example, are misunderstood, at least by laymen. They shock people. But you see, what's important about them is not his conclusions or his opinions. It's the method. He has done more than anyone else I can think of to get the general public accustomed to the style of modern military thinking. Today it's possible for a columnist to write about counterforce strategy, and minimum deterrence, and credible first strike capability, without having to explain every other word. He can write about war and strategy without getting bogged down in questions or morality. 10. The other big difference about our work is breadth. The report speaks for itself. I can't say that we took every relevant aspect of life and society into account, but I don't think we missed anything essential. Why was the project given to an outside commission? Why couldn't it have been handled by an appropriate government agency? I think that's obvious. Or should be. The kind of thinking wanted from our group just isn't to be had in a formal government operation. Too many constraints. Too many inhibitions. This isn't a new problem. Why else would outfits like Rand and Hudson stay in business? Any assignment that's at all sophisticated is almost always given to an outside group. This is true even in the State Department. In the gray operations, those that are supposed to be unofficial, but are really as official as can be. Also with the CIA. For our study, even the private research centers were too institutional. A lot of thought went into making sure that our thinking would be unrestricted. All kinds of little things. The way we were called into the group. The places we met. All kinds of subtle devices to remind us. For instance, even our name. The Special Study Group. You know government names. Wouldn't you think we'd have been called Operation Olive Branch, or Project Pacifica, or something like that? Nothing like that for us. Too elusive. Too suggestive. And no minutes of our meetings. Too inhibiting. About who might be reading them. Of course, we took notes for our own use. And among ourselves, we usually called ourselves the Iron Mountain Boys, or our thing, or whatever came to mind. What can you tell me about the members of the group? I'll have to stick to generalities. There were 15 of us. The important thing was that we represented a very wide range of disciplines. And not all academic. People from the natural sciences, the social sciences, even the humanities. We had a lawyer and a businessman. Also, a professional war planner. Also, you should know that everyone in the group had done work of distinction in at least 2 different fields. The interdisciplinary element was built in. It's true that there were no women in the group, but I don't think that was significant. We were all American citizens, of course, and all, I can say, in very good health, at least when we began. You see, the first order of business, at the first meeting, was the reading of dossiers. They were very detailed, and 11, not just professional, but also personal. They included medical histories. I remember one very curious thing. for whatever it's worth. Most of us, and that includes me, had a record of abnormally high uric acid concentrations in the blood. None of us had ever had this experience of a public inspection of credentials or medical reports. It was very disturbing, but it was deliberate. The reason for it was to emphasize that we were supposed to make all our own decisions on procedure without outside rules. This included judging each other's qualifications and making allowances for possible bias. I don't think it affected our work directly, but it made the point it was supposed to make. That we should ignore absolutely nothing that might conceivably affect our objectivity. At this point I persuaded Doe that a brief occupational description of the individual members of the group would serve a useful purpose for readers of the report. The list which follows was worked out on paper. It might be more accurate to say it was negotiated. The problem was to give as much relevant information as possible without violating Doe's commitment to protect his colleagues' anonymity. It turned out to be very difficult, especially in the cases of those members who are very well known. For this reason, secondary areas of achievement or reputations are usually not shown. The simple alphabetical names were assigned by Doe for convenient reference. They bear no intended relation to actual names. Abel was the group's Washington contact. It was he who brought and read the dossiers, and who most often acted as chairman. He, Baker, and Cox were the three who had been involved in the preliminary planning. There is no other significance to the order of listing. Arthur Abel is an historian and political theorist who has served in government. Bernard Baker is a professor of international law and a consultant on government operations. Charles Cox is an economist, social critic, and biographer. John Doe. Edward Ellis is a sociologist often involved in public affairs. 12. Frank Fox is a cultural anthropologist. George Green is a psychologist, educator, and developer of personnel testing systems. Harold Hill is a psychiatrist who has conducted extensive studies of the relationship between individual and group behavior. John Jones is a scholar and literary critic. Martin Miller is a physical chemist whose work has received international recognition at the highest level. Paul Peters is a biochemist who has made important discoveries bearing on reproductive processes. Richard Rowe is a mathematician affiliated with an independent West Coast research institution. Samuel Smith is an astronomer, physicist, and communications theorist. Thomas Taylor is a systems analyst and war planner who has written extensively on war, peace, and international relations. William White is an industrialist who has undertaken many special government assignments.
Well, I hope you all enjoy the information that I have given you. Once again, I am only a guidepost. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. So I hope you enjoyed. Bye. Thank you.